Hey, it's Brendan. I'm here with another video in my ongoing series on synthesis and sound design, and how to turn the sounds that are rattling around in your head into real synthesizers you can use in your projects. As always, I'm going to be doing this in Helm, a free cross-platform synth program, which I've put a link to in the description to this video, in case you don't have it yet. But as always, the things that I'll be going over in this video should mostly be applicable to just about any synth you'll be using. And with that out of the way, I think I'd like to sort of do a 180 from what we did in our last video, where I showed you how to make a somewhat soft, evolving, slow pad style bass to a more aggressive, distorted 808 style bass. One that you might hear on, some latter-day Kanye or Death Grips style stuff. And to get started, I think I'm actually going to go with what might not be an immediately obvious choice for my waveform. If we're going for what is eventually going to be a pretty distorted sound, you might think we would start with a pretty rich sound. That would already have a lot of buzz on it. But I'm actually going to start with a pretty simple sine wave in my sub oscillator. Not these main two, but my sub oscillator. Let's hear what that sounds like on its own. Pretty simple right off the bat. And the reason I want to start with a fairly simple sound is that a lot of the tonality of our 808 is going to come from this distortion and this feedback here, and not necessarily the oscillators themselves so much. I don't want to get it too muddied up by, a lot of high frequency information in the oscillators. I want a lot of the color to come from the plugins and things like that. Although I do want to slightly alter this sine wave using our shuffle function here, which we used in our last video. And you can take a look at the oscilloscope at the top to see what this is going to do to this simple sine wave. It's going to take it from being two evenly split parts of a waveform to sort of compressing and stretching different sections of it to give a unique sound. Let's hear what it sounds like. If I really push it all the way. But I think I'm going to leave it around, 35% or so. I think that's a pretty good basis. It's got a bit more buzz to it already than a sine wave, but not quite as busy as, a sawtooth or even a square wave, really. So that's our, basic first waveform setup, and I'll probably go back in and add some more sort of higher register oscillators a little later on. But for now, I'd like to just keep on setting up some of the basics of this. One of those things is, as always, I want just one voice if we're working on a bass. Because, if we have, let's say, two voices of this same bass, it's going to get really muddy if we accidentally hit the notes before it finishes. Just really a mess. So we're going to play it safe and just do one voice at a time. To just clean it up a bit. As far as portamento, I think I would like that on this track. Because I really like the sound of gliding between octaves, which is sort of a compositional trick that is used a lot in music that uses a dirty 808. And I might even turn this up a little bit so it takes a bit longer. And I might fine-tune that a little bit later on too, but I think that's a good starting point. And with our basic waveform selected and the fundamental settings of this synth setup, I think it's time to start carving out our amplitude envelope and figure out what the volume of this synth is going to be over time. So an 808 is an interesting bit of synthesizer. It falls in an interesting section of synthesizers where it has to have sort of that punchy quality of any drum, really, any percussive instrument, where you want to have a clear peak at the beginning to sort of, really cut through rhythmically. But you also want a good amount of sustain, on the low end from a melodic standpoint, because it's going to serve also as the bass and really, hold together the bottom end of this piece. and often will sort of be, the key thing determining what the chord progression is in a track that has an 808 in it. So it's important that we're able to hear both a clear start to it and a sustained, tone through it. And there's two ways that we could get this effect. I'm just going to set up the basic amplitude envelope to start and get us a little bit closer than we have now. So, fast attack, you want it to be close to instant, but not quite there necessarily. Although actually when I work with drums, that is one time that I sometimes shift the attack to, immediate as opposed to very slightly after. Because the clicking that you sometimes get when you have an instant attack can be useful for this type of drum, especially because it's going to be distorted already. So if we get some slight artifacts, it's not really a huge deal. Relatively fast decay, moderate sustain, and let's get a nice release here. And I'm just going to click that and hear what it sounds like. Well, it's already getting a little bit closer to the sound I want. And I think to really hammer home the click at the beginning, there's sort of two tactics I could take here, right? I could set up sort of a sweeping filter, where it's basically going to be, let's get the envelope depth up here. We'll get it set up to our filter envelope, which let's say it's pretty fast. And we can hear what that sounds like. Which might work for some tracks. I think for this, though, I have some plans for sort of all my envelopes. And I think I would like to make use of a slightly different trick. But I will use sort of a similar shape to the envelope where it's just that smallest little sliver that starts immediately. I'm going to use my mod envelope here. And instead of having it control a filter over the whole of the sound, I'm just going to directly control the volume of a particular oscillator. One that we really haven't made too much use of yet, which is the noise oscillator. And what this is going to be doing is it's going to serve sort of, not to give any melodic information, but just to sort of act as, the sound of an impact you would get from like a stick hitting a snare drum, or the foot pedal thing hitting a bass drum, something like that, where there's an immediate snap and then it fades away. So I'm going to just get that same little sliver here, no sustain, no release, and I'll dial in the decay as we go. Let's just hear what that sounds. Oh, let's map that to the noise. So this is going to be controlling directly the noise oscillator's volume, which will be by default starting at 0, and then it'll spike up slightly and then go back to 0. So let's hear what it sounds like. And I think that's probably a bit more than I really need. I think I'm just going to start by dialing this back down a bit. And I'm going to slightly dial back the decay. It's a somewhat subtle effect, but I think it does really help to give a clear beginning to this sound, which is useful if it's, really holding down an important part rhythmically. So I'll leave it in for now. I might fine-tune it a bit later. So we have the very basic building blocks of our 808 here. And I want to just start adding some color to this. Let me get my filter off. Actually, I'll keep it for now. I might, take it away and use it for something else a little bit later. But for now, let's do some distortion. All right, now I'm going to take that filter off. I'm going to map the frequency instead to the amplitude envelope. Okay. So you can hear that that has added a ton of character to this sound. And I think I might go ahead and have the velocity modulate the amount of drive that we have. So the harder that I hit the key, the more of a drive effect we'll have. You know, not going to be a huge range of difference, but just enough that it will add some room for, you know, a bit of reactivity to our play style. Nice. And I think I might, you know, yeah, I'll lower the release a little bit. You know, there's some 808s you want them to go forever. This one I think I want to be a bit more punchier. Nice. And I'm going to do sort of a similar thing with the feedback. Let's just add that in to start. I'm trying to think about what exactly I'd like to have the feedback be doing, you know, sort of melodically, because as I went over a bit in the last episode, but I'll, you know, go on a bit more here, this feedback filter, it actually is sort of tuned, right? And it adds sort of a bit of distortion and harmonic richness to the sound, you know, in such a way where if you add, you know, sort of a positive percentage here, it's going to shift the overall frequency of your synth a bit higher. And if you shift it down, it'll, you know, make everything a bit lower. And I think what I'd like to do here is basically, yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so as the sound goes on, it's going to shift a bit lower. So it's sort of like the 808 is mellowing out and it's moving to a lower sort of bassy sound. Which will do two things. One of which is that, you know, it'll stay fairly high at the beginning. So that sort of, you know, immediate clicking sound will still cut through. It won't be too low frequency-wise. But then we'll also have a really solid bass sound as we get further on. And it'll really, you know, be very solid in the mix. So let's go ahead and what we can do is we can start, you know, let's figure out where we want to end the sound. Okay, I think that's about where I want to end. And we can sort of work our way backwards, right? So we can take the amplitude envelope and we'll just draw back to, you know, whatever we want the highest point to be. Let's say, there. And, you know, that's as simple as that. Let's hear that. Nice. So I think we're starting to get a little bit closer to the sound I want here. And I'm going to start to add in some extra oscillators now to add a bit more depth to this sound. So let's start by adding another sine wave. Let's just mix it in a bit and hear what it sounds like. I think I'd like to also have this map to velocity, so the harder we're playing, sort of the more of that higher frequency we're getting on top of the sub. So let's go ahead and do that. Hear what it sounds like. Okay, nice. I'm going to move this drive down a little bit to start. Nice. Okay, and I think I'd like to do a bit of a sort of warbling effect to this oscillator here. And I think what I'd like to do to this is I sort of want to make it, this is an effect that you've probably, you know, heard before in an 808 or, you know, some basses in general, which is there'll be sort of like a slight shift up and then back down to the main tone, sort of bending down, you know, which is, I think, might be especially prominent if you're hitting it very hard. And how I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna set up the filter envelope. I think I'm gonna just start with it as it is now, so it's gonna be a pretty quick effect. Or I could just use the mod envelope. I guess it's already more or less set up the way I want it to be. I'm going to send that to the tune knob here. And what that should do is when we hit our key, it's going to pretty quickly jump from, that higher note down to, being back in tune again, which will sound like this. Now let me see if I can solo that. Might be too hard to really hear right now. I think I actually am going to map it to, the filter envelope just because I think I want a bit more decay. And let's really exaggerate it so we can dial it in. And I think I might want a slight delay to the start of it. So it'll sound like this. Nice. And I think, I'm going to dial that back a little bit. All right. In an ideal world, there would be a way to map the velocity directly to the strength of this envelope here. But I think instead, I'm just going to really double down on adding the velocity of the oscillator itself. So now, the harder that we hit the keys, the more we'll be able to hear that sound in general. So let's hear it on its own one more time. You know what we can do as well is we can go ahead and map that to the tune knob of the feedback. Hear what that sounds like. Which again might be a sort of subtle change. Let's hear it without. Let's hear it with. Not a huge change, but I think sort of just accentuates that sort of, distortion, not just through the coloring of this, but also through the pitch of it, which I think adds, a nice bit of interest to the sound. So let's mix it back in with a sub. Here we got. Let's increase this. Nice. I think we're getting closer to the sound that I'm hoping for. And I think I'd like to add some last little bits for now. One of which is I'll probably add, an LFO to just the filter overall. Let's hear what it sounds like. It's a bit too much there, but just sort of to add a bit of wubbing, a very technical term, wubbing. Let's hear what it sounds like. All right. Which I think we'll really hear if we increase the release on this. Nice. All right, I think we're starting to get somewhere. And I think I'm going to add a bit of reverb on and do a similar trick to what I did in the last video, which is make it so that, in that very beginning, often in Helm, if there is a quick, quite high volume sound, it might lead to some sort of, not necessarily artifacts, but I just don't quite care for the sound in the reverb. So what I tend to do is I sort of duck the mix of the reverb, with the amplitude, so that when the general volume of the sound is high, the mix of the reverb is low, but we sort of get a gradual, mixing in of the reverb to just, sort of fill out the tail end as the general amplitude is lowering, and especially, as it's getting back to zero. So it sort of just fades in nicely. Let's go ahead and map that thusly. And also I will sort of do the inverse with the damping. Damping meaning, you know, the lower this is, you can just hear it here, the longer it takes for the reverb to fade out. But the higher it is, you know, it's a pretty fast effect. I think I'm going to lower that even more. So yeah, I'm going to make it so that the damping just increases as the amplitude increases and ducks back to a slightly longer release as the sound goes down. I think I want a fairly subtle bit of reverb in this one, because, you know, you can hear really in that high end, you know, just some of the limits with using a percussive sound in Helm with the reverb. Just sort of, you know, a bit of crunchiness that I don't quite care for. So I'm going to do just a lower mix. Nice. I think there's probably more I could do to this. You know, one thing is I think I am going to just going to change the tune knob on the feedback with an LFO, which again is not going to be something that's going to create a ton of, you know, it's not going to be a hugely noticeable effect, but I think it just, you know, it's a nice little touch that might add a bit of interest to the 808 over time. Nice. I think I'm just going to leave it there for now. I'm pretty happy with this. Something, you know, I might add on is a little bit of key track. Which you can really hear, and it's sort of a nice, sort of starkly noticeable effect, which works sort of well for this type of sound. You know, that huge difference between the fairly mellow, you know, as far as the amount of high end coming through, you know, the fairly mellow lower notes, and then when you really go up an octave or two, you know, really pokes through. I'm pretty happy with this. Something that, you know, I would probably do once I have the rest of the track written out, is I would, you know, tune the amplitude envelope just so that it, you know, is lasting as long as I want it to. That's something that I tend to really, you know, tailor to the track that I'm working on, and sometimes even find a way for it to sort of fade in tempo so that it ends, you know, on a particular beat, maybe as a snare is coming in or something like that. But, you know, I think as it stands right now, I'm pretty happy with this. And I, you know, hope that you're able to make a similar synth and you can use it in your tracks. If you do, I'd love to hear it. And yeah, I think I will probably go on and make maybe a short little playlist of just drum sounds that you can make in Helm, mostly using the noise, but also with some other things. But that'll be probably in a couple weeks' time. For now, have a great rest of your day or night, whatever time of day it is for you, and I'll see you again in the next video. Have a good one.